This is House Planning Help episode 4.
Have you always wanted to build your dream home? Maybe you know what you want. But what if it could be better? HousePlanningHelp.com. Speaking to the experts, searching for better ways, planning for the future, build a better home. HousePlanningHelp.com podcast.
Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and today we continue our mini-series on the Passivhaus standard. I'll be speaking to Dr. Wolfgang Feist, co-originator of the concept and founder of the Passivhaus Institute in Germany. And I want to know more about you.
HousePlanningHelp.com.
So session number 4, thank you very much for downloading. I'm going to get into the content very soon with a high caliber guest. It's Dr. Feist himself, the man behind the Passivhaus standard, or one of the men behind that. And I'm really enjoying these podcasts. I hope you are as well, which is why I wondered whether I could actually have a couple of minutes of your time. When I set up this podcast, I had a clear idea that I might be attracting people to this podcast who are looking to build their own homes or to start to build up that knowledge. And I just wondered whether that was true or not, because I have a sneaking suspicion that actually there are quite a few people who are involved in the industry, either checking up on me, make sure I'm not talking nonsense, but most of the information that we're getting is directly from our guests, who are all experts and people who have really excelled in what they do. So my favour is this: if you can head on to the website houseplanninghelp.com/survey, so I can try and see if you're happy with what we're doing. Are there any topics that I should be researching next? Can you think of any other ideas of how we can make this better? So houseplanninghelp.com/survey. And over time as well, I'd really like to build this up. The idea I have in my head is that because I run my own production company and we do lots of video, that perhaps we can get some video onto the website. The only issue for me is that it's very time consuming video, but I'm sure there's a lot to gain in video how-tos, because it seems that people are in the dark a lot about where they should be going, what they should be doing, how they should be building for the future. Me included, I'm learning along the way, but I just feel we could be learning so much more, particularly after last week's guest, Pat from Touchwood Homes. One of his clients who's about to start building very soon, this is Jason and Lucy. They are constructing an energy efficient home, and there's the possibility that we could get on site and create some of these videos. But as I mentioned, this content is not exactly cheap to produce, so I want to see if that's something that you would like as a service that we could provide on a membership site, which is just to people who subscribe each month. If you're not interested, well, that's fine, we'll bin that idea straight away. But that's why I want you to fill in this survey, just so I can get an idea of who you are, what you're after, and whether we're catering for those needs. So I'll put a link in the show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/survey. It's time to meet our guest for this session, and I've already mentioned who it is, but on Twitter he describes himself as a curious physicist with interest in sustainability, energy efficiency especially. As I see it, he's a man who's been bashing his head against a brick wall for quite a few years, but you know what, I think that wall is starting to crack a little bit. He is head of energy efficient construction and building physics at the University of Innsbruck, Austria, and director of the Passivhaus Institute in Darmstadt, Germany. Dr. Wolfgang Feist.
HousePlanningHelp.com. The interview.
I'm with Dr. Wolfgang Feist, and today we're going to be finding out more about the Passivhaus standard. But as we like to do with our guests as we get them onto the podcast, we just find out a bit more information. So my first question to you is about energy efficiency and how you became involved.
Well, I'm a physicist, and we were working in the 70s on how to deliver the growing demand for energy in the world. And when we looked a little bit more thoroughly into what the energy is used for, the surprising result was that most of the energy is just wasted. So it's a good idea to first improve the efficiency we use the energy, and there's a big potential for improving efficiency.
And is that the best method, to go for energy efficiency first and then to deal with how you meet those energy needs?
Yes, of course it is. It's like in every other things, first to look for what you really need, the services you really need, and then you can design, say, a building in a way that it uses far less energy than you are used to in the past.
What were the early challenges that you faced?
course, it's all a scientific issue. And so first thing to do was to look how is it possible and how far is it possible to improve the efficiency. But it very soon turned out that that is, scientifically speaking, quite easy. So the more important issue at the end is how to get that through to the market, because we are used to do it in a different way, and that's far more difficult than the scientific part.
So this brings us to the Passivhaus standard, which is gathering momentum at the moment. What is it on its simplest level?
Well, it's a very high energy efficiency, mainly by improving the building's envelope to reduce the energy losses you normally have, so that you only need a very low amount of heat to keep it warm and of cooling to keep it cool. And that's in the range of 1/10 what we used to need in the past. So that's the main background. And the surprising is that it not just reduces the amount of energy you need, but it also improves the comfort in the building.
Are there any other benefits on top of that? I mean, they sound like pretty big benefits already.
When you look into the results of the existing passive houses, it's not only the better comfort and the reduced energy demand, it's also that you have a far higher quality of the building envelope, and that means that it will last longer. And there's another benefit, that is it's simpler than the normal way of doing it. So at the end, it's improving also the way we maintain the building in the future.
Does it have to look in a specific way or have a specific style?
Well, if you look at the passive houses already being realized, you won't be able to tell that it is a passive house. That's the other side. You can build any building style, you can build any type of building, you can build offices, swimming halls, schools, dwellings, whatever you want. And you can use any kind of material. You can build in masonry construction, you can build in timber construction, you can build load-bearing structures with concrete, whatever you want.
I keep wondering why this hasn't moved further. How come the construction industry hasn't jumped on this?
Our construction industry is a very conservative industry. So they try to do what they've done all the time. And it's not so easy to change the habits of that part of industry. This is different from automotive and others. But still, it's going really fast at the moment, because it's not so different from what they've done in the past. So they can learn how to do that, but they have to decide what they want to learn.
If we didn't do anything, do you see any big problem with energy coming? And if there is a date for that, how soon do you think it would be?
You already have it, or it's energy is much more expensive than it was 10 years ago. A lot of people have problems with paying for their heating bills, so we already have that problem. In addition, we have problems with the consequences of that very big amount of use of fossil fuels in giving carbon dioxide to the Earth's atmosphere. So this is also a growing problem. So we really need to change the way we use energy.
And by using less energy, we will also reduce our carbon footprint. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the main background. The highest amount of energy being used in the UK, in European Union and worldwide is fossil fuel. That is more than 80% of all the energy being used. So if we reduce the amount of energy we need, we'll reduce the amount of fossil fuel burned, and by burning fossil fuel we emit the carbon dioxide.
Is there a particular place in the world that this standard is best suited, or are you saying it could be introduced anywhere in the world, any temperature range? It's a standard that is a world standard.
It is a world standard, but we have to be cautious. It's not like you build a building in, say, a factory in Japan, and you drop it by a helicopter at any place of the world and it will work. that won't work. It's more a method. It's a method how to design a building adequate to the climate you are in. So a passive house in Jakarta looks significantly different from a passive house in St. Petersburg. But the method how to do it is the same. So as a design method, how to design for good indoor climate, depending on the climate you are in. That's mainly what a passive house is.
So what are the key differences in how you alter the house to make it reach this passive house standard?
Yeah, so let's go back to the UK situation, because the measures are a little bit different whether we are in the UK or we are in, say, Turkey. So let's go back to the UK situation. So the most important thing in the UK is insulation. The second important thing is insulation. And to make the insulation in a way that we really avoid thermal bridging. Third important thing is airtightness. Yeah? It was a little bit new for the UK because the buildings haven't been airtight in the past, but we've seen it's not such a difficult thing to do. Then there are improved windows. Window quality has a very high influence on the energy balance of buildings. The next thing is, if you build an airtight building, and you'll have to build airtight buildings in the future, you need ventilation, because people need fresh air. So that's the fourth part. And that's it. Insulation, airtightness, good windows, and the ventilation.
What opportunities will be coming out of passive house being introduced more widely?
Well, the most important thing is, of course, we get independent of those foreign energy sources. Yeah, that's a big problem for the European Union, importing lot amounts of fossil fuel from the outside, and that's why the European Commission is behind that development. We want us to get efficient buildings. There's another thing. In order to do that, we have to improve the buildings. So it's an improved building envelope. Now, the interesting thing is that the products needed for that, and that the production of the buildings, that's all taking place in the European Union. So this is also creating employment. That's the other reason why lots of governments are behind that type of development. A third thing is that by improving the building envelope, comfort is better. So this is an advantage for the users in the building. And you don't have to talk to me for that. Its best way is to talk to some of the occupants of existing passive house premises to see what they say. And it's very interesting what they say in the UK. So you can ask whomever you want. You'll get very interesting answers about how they feel in their passive houses. This is a win-win situation for all of us. And so that's why I think it's a very good idea to go this path of better efficiency. Well, not only for buildings, it's also possible for office equipment, for cars, and so on.
I've always been someone who's very interested in energy efficiency. When you build a house, the process that I'm going through at the moment, it's all about what choices you can make. And it seems to me that energy efficiency is a very black and white issue. There are other things that are more confusing, but this is something that we should all strive towards. And it's just very simple. I know you have lived in a passive house for quite a long time, and you've talked a little bit about how you feel. But if I'm someone who is buying a passive house, how do I know to begin with that it's been built properly? Is that what the standard actually is? That if I buy a house that's passive house standard, I know it's been constructed and will operate to this efficiency, or do I have to live in it first?
No, well, there is an organization founded here in the UK called the Passive House Trust. They are offering certification for passive houses, so if you want to be sure, you can get a certified passive house. And that's very important to have that thing available. That means that now if somebody has an advertisement, he's selling you a passive house, it's well known what this means. So if there is a problem later, it might go to the court, and then the decision will be, well, it's well known what a passive house is because there is a certification available, so nobody can come and say, this is a passive house, and it's far from what it is. So we can't stand behind everything what is happening in all parts of the world, but the passive house is one of the developments you can be quite sure that it's done in a proper way.
What do you stand to gain from this? What is your motivation?
Well, the Passivhaus Institute is a small research facility. So we are working in research, for example, developing improved components like the better windows. We are working now together with the city of Frankfurt building the first Passivhaus hospital. So we live from working together with those who get these things realized, the components got on the market, and the government and the European Commission who want us to create a future which is worth living in.
You mentioned about the governments there. Is there anything they should be doing to help along the way?
Yes, there are lots of instruments governments are already using. What we've seen from all around the world, the most important is to create a background where innovation is accepted. Very often this is not easy. It's not easy to do innovative things. And to be able to do innovative things, you need a tolerant environment. That's one of the most important things to get these things done. The second thing is, if a government really wants to help that development coming forward, the best thing to do is to give some incentives. And the incentives don't need to be money. In one example from Italy, the government decided that if somebody is building a really energy efficient building, he has allowance for using a bigger part of the land he is building on. So that doesn't cost the taxpayer any money, but it's a big incentive for investors to do energy efficient buildings. So there are lots of examples of what government can do. Also to distribute the information about how to improve efficiency in new construction and in refurbishment of existing buildings.
That is a big issue too, isn't it? The retrofitting all of the existing stock, which I suppose is a large percentage of the houses that we have, because of course we can't build everything brand new.
Yeah.
So what does that challenge mean? I'm assuming that's a lot tougher.
Yes, it is, definitely. It definitely is. The most important thing is that you have to see that the existing building stock is not static. It's developing. You always exchange a window, you fix a roof, you fix a wall, and so on. Now we have to realize that these moments where you fix a roof anyhow, that's the very moment you have to improve the insulation. Otherwise, it's too expensive. Yeah, so that's the way to go. To improve everything at the very moment where you are. If a scaffolding is going up, that's the moment. Yeah, you should decide about improving the components. And if you improve a component, you should go to the best available, because it will be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years until you do it again. Yeah? So that's the philosophy behind improving existing buildings. Now, there are big differences between existing buildings. So on the one extreme, most buildings in Europe have been built in the 60s, 70s, 80s. That's the main part of the building stock. And they are quite easy to refurbish. Well, if they are worth refurbishing, they are quite easy to refurbish. Then there are the buildings, the older ones, some of them listed buildings, and that's a little bit more difficult because we also have to take into account the history of these buildings and the fact that we want to preserve these historical issues. There is a lot of ongoing research, so there are a lot of measures what we still can do with these, our old ones.
We haven't really talked money, but what is the cost of all of the technology that we need? We've mentioned the windows, etc., the insulation.
Yeah, let's take, for example, a window. Normal windows cost in the range of, I think in UK, is £300 a square meter, something like that. So now if you go to a component which we would call a Passivhaus window, that's triple glazed, well-insulated frame, airtight window, that might be £80 more. So we are discussing a difference of £80 between the normal ones and the Passivhaus ones on the market at the moment. We are working on reducing that difference, but if you calculate for the life cycle cost of this investment, you'll see it's hard to find any investment today which has a better internal interest rate than such an investment. So it's good to do that. It's a different thing, and that's always done the wrong way. You won't exchange this window just for saving energy, that would be, the cost will be £380 per square meter, and that won't work. So that it's again showing that it's very important to do it at the very moment where you exchange the window. Anyhow, that's the decision to be made, and afterwards it's done.
What are your goals for this? You've been working on this technology and this standard for such a long time. Do you set yourself yearly goals, or are you just knowing that when the time is right, it will happen?
To be honest, we are a research institute, so our influence is mainly an indirect influence. So we can help the industry and we can help the government to do that better. But of course, we are not ones who will change the policy or will be able to move the whole direction of the development. Although a lot of things in the past that happened were somehow induced by the examples we were able to give. So we are concentrating on really good demonstration projects to show what can be done. We are concentrating on producing tools for the architects or for the engineers to make it easier for them to design such a energy efficient building. We help organizations like the US Passivhaus Trust to gain members and to gain knowledge and to make that knowledge available. So that's the things we do, and I think we are quite successful with doing that.
One final question, and it's around the future of energy efficiency. You've obviously done a lot of work, and we're hoping that it's going to move in a specific direction, but does it just go on and on, what we can save? Will we look back on the past and think how wasteful we've been?
Well, there is, from a physical point of view, no need to use energy for having comfortable temperatures and things like that. We could, from a technical and physical point of view, reduce it to not to zero, but to almost zero. On the other side, there is again no need for that, because there is a certain amount of renewable energy available from wind power, from solar, from water energy. So the development that we have had so far with a passive house is to a point where we call these buildings nearly zero energy buildings. That means that the consumption is 1/10 of what it has been in the past, and what means that the energy you need is so low that it will be available from regional sources of energy anywhere in the world without a big problem. So at the end, there is no need to go much further than that. But of course, it could happen, and we already see some parts of the development happening, it could happen that we get, say, even more efficient windows, which will allow for building buildings which consume even less energy than they do, without increasing costs very much. It's hard to say what will happen in the future, but one thing is clear: the whole perspective of better energy efficiency opens a path in the future where we won't need fossil fuels any longer on a big scale.
Dr. Feist, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another industry expert on houseplanninghelp.com.
Some more great content about the Passive House standard from the man himself. You can follow Wolfgang on Twitter at Wolfgang Feist. I'll put that into the show notes too. And I'd love to hear what you think. Maybe you have some questions, some comments, a criticism perhaps that we could get answered in a future episode. We could do a Q&A session. I'm open to all sorts. Just send your emails to feedback@houseplanninghelp.com. And that'll go into the show notes too. And just before I head out of here, a final reminder of our survey. It's at houseplanninghelp.com/survey. I'd love you to go there now. What would you like me to investigate next time? Well, I'm afraid we've got that one planned, but maybe the session afterwards. So next time on the podcast from houseplanninghelp.com, we speak to the co-author of a new book called The Passive House Handbook. That's Adam Dadabai. He's on next time. I hope you'll be around too.
You've been listening to Ben Adam Smith on the path to build a better home. Sign up now to the free email newsletter. Head to houseplanninghelp.com.